Good evening, everybody, and Happy New Year. It's time to kick off the first author discussion of 2024, and I'm your host, Pinki Shah, to get this event started with my co-host, Sabina. We will have question answer session planned for, we do have a question answer session planned for later. So feel free to raise your hand or type your question in the chat and we'll gladly ask it for you. Just as a reminder, this event is being recorded. And while Nikki and I'm chatting with author, please keep yourself on mute so it's not we don't get interrupted. Tonight we are joined by Nikki Erlick. Her debut novel, The Measure, was an instant New York Times bestseller upon publication in June 2022, with translation in 22 languages. The Measure was selected as today's show's Read with Jenna book club pick, as well as Barnes & Noble's Discover pick. Nikki graduated Harvard University summa cum laude and was an editor of the Harvard Crimson. She earned her master's degree in global thought from Columbia University. A very warm welcome to our Books and Beyond event, Nikki. We are so thrilled to have you here tonight. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation. It's a very fun way to start the new year, as you said.
Absolutely. We are very excited. And I do have like a questions planned for our discussions, but before even we dive deep into the discussion, I was interested in learning more about your journey as a writer. And what I was thinking that COVID-19 pandemic brought a lot of challenges to the world, and it was hard to ignore the impact, which we are still kind of dealing with. Was the idea of this book conceived during the pandemic? Could you share a little bit story behind that, how you came up with this captivating plot?
Sure. Interestingly, I do get a lot of people who ask if the book was inspired by the pandemic. I think there are a lot of very obvious similarities between kind of the events that happen in the book and what we all experienced together as a world during that time. But I actually had the idea for the book pretty far before the pandemic. I was thinking about this idea, the strings, the boxes, already by late 2018. I think I had this kind of cooking in my head. And I started brainstorming the characters and kind of living in the world, and was writing over the course of kind of 2019. At the time I had a day job. I was working in the travel industry as a travel writer. And so I was chipping away very slowly at the book, kind of, on the weekends and the evenings after work. And then, of course, as you mentioned, kind of March 2020, the pandemic really kind of struck here in the US. And I was working in the travel industry, which was, one of the first and hardest kind of hit industries. And so I got laid off from my job very fast in March. And ultimately then kind of what I thought was like this, the lowest point of my life, kind of is unexpectedly, losing my job, moving back in with my parents, being in quarantine, just, all everything that we all kind of experienced. That was really the time that then for those coming months of kind of isolation and unemployment, that was when I really finished writing the book. And I wrote kind of the vast majority of the book over the course of 2020. And I do think some of kind of the latter half of the story took on new life because of what was going on in the world at the time. And really the ways that I had already started writing a book about, a very mysterious, unexpected, sudden kind of global crisis, and then found myself, living and writing in the midst of a very similar situation. And so I did realize there was an opportunity for me to kind of draw upon what was happening in the world and kind of have it reflected in the story, really just to make my story feel more kind of realistic and authentic, because I wanted, I knew that it's a somewhat unrealistic premise, right? You have to kind of accept the kind of the fantasy of the premise. And so I wanted everything else in the book to feel like super realistic and like this is how kind of things would actually play out.
So do you think, because you said that the idea was born in 2018, but you actually got to work on it while during pandemic because of the situation you were put in, or all of us in a way were put in. Do you think that kind of changed the course of a story? You said that you added a little bit of more realistic value, but did it change the story or not so much?
I think it was always, I think like the questions brought up by the story and kind of the themes of the story were always going to be there. It was already, I already had all of the characters. It was already a book about kind of, what would you do and what would you do with this knowledge, and um, a chance for readers to kind of think about their priorities in life, and what they, how they measure their own lives. And I think that, those were always going to be kind of the questions of the story. And then they just became so much more kind of relevant and urgent for everybody during that time, because all of a sudden those were the questions that we were all asking ourselves of, how do I want to spend my time kind of right now? And when I come out of this, like, how am I going to kind of reshape, reprioritize my life? How do we treat other people, especially kind of the people in our communities who are more vulnerable? Are we kind of, are we there for them during difficult times or not? And those were questions we were asking ourselves during the pandemic. And I think they were always going to be questions that this book brings up. But certainly, I think they just resonated with people a lot more than I ever could have anticipated when I first started writing this book, kind of, 2 years before any of that started.
Right, right, right. Yeah. And what made me think this, the impact we have on others is ultimate measure of our life, not merely the duration of our lives. Could you elaborate on how you landed on the title of your book, The Measure, not the strings?
Yeah. So The Measure was always the title of the book, which is interesting. Like the first Word document that I had in 2018,
Oh.
it was titled like The Measure, like draft TBD or something. Like I was like, The Measure was a placeholder kind of title at the time, but it was the first title that I thought of. And then it just never changed. Like I never went back and thought of something else. Once I started working with an editor and a publisher, nobody ever questioned the title. We all just kind of, we all just,
yeah,
it just fit, I guess. And I think, for me, it's exactly what you said. It's that, there's so many different measurements in this book there, and in our lives. It's obvious it's not just the measure of the string and the measure in the amount of years of somebody's life, but it's, how you personally choose to measure kind of your time, your impact, the legacy you leave behind, all of these things. I think it's also how we measure ourselves as a community, as a society. How are we kind of, evaluating ourselves based on how we all treat each other. And it's been, I obviously, I like the title. I like that it has all those kind of connotations and layers. It's been interesting because, as you mentioned, the book is being translated in a lot of different languages in different countries. And the title is something that's becoming kind of the thing that's most likely to change in the translations, because other languages don't necessarily have the same word like measure that we have in English that has all of those kind of layers into it. And so that's been the one thing that, interestingly, the foreign publishers are kind of coming back to me and saying, is it okay if we change the title to this? Because the measure just doesn't it just doesn't translate the way that you want it to. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Did you feel that you compromised in one of the language, if you have to give us an example?
I don't think so. No, sometimes some of them are still like the measure. Some of them are a little more long. They're like the measure of your life.
Okay.
I think the Spanish title has like a subtitle that's like the Threads of Destiny or something, which sounds very kind of like, whoa, magical. There's there are some variations, but I think that they're all, I trust that the people in these other, that the publishers in these other countries know what they're doing. I obviously don't speak all those languages, but it's been, a really fun, unexpected part of this journey to kind of see the book cover, in all of these different languages. It's wild.
I bet. And although I feel that the origin of the strings is not significant consideration as the book progress, I'm curious to know, as a perspective or as author's perspective, What did you have, like any backstory of about the appearance of the boxes?
Yeah, I think I knew as I was writing it that this would be something that, deciding not to reveal where the boxes came from was something that maybe would upset readers. But I didn't realize that it would be such a kind of such a big point of discussion that like every time readers are always like, but you know where they came from, right? Like tell me where that like you have the answer. You're just not giving it to me. And like truthfully, I think, as you said, I the idea for the strings, to be totally transparent, came from like ancient Greek mythology, and that they believed in the idea of these three fates, these three kind of goddess figures who would weave these kind of threads of fate, and they were in charge of kind of determining the amount of time that every human mortal down below them would receive, and they would snip kind of the thread at the end of a person's life.
Mhm.
And so this concept, so the concept of the string and a string that kind of measures how long you would live, came from Greek mythology. But beyond that, I didn't really have an idea of if I wanted to, where I wanted them to come from. And I think pretty clearly kind of decided that wasn't the story that I was interested in. It's definitely, it is an interesting story. If I was writing more of kind of a sci-fi fantasy book, I think then that would have become the story.
Right, right.
But I was interested in writing about, okay, these strings are here. What do we do with them as
Now what?
humans? And
Yeah.
like writing the kind of the human side of the story. How do they impact relationships and communities and kind of that just like that was more interesting to me. And also I think not giving that answer has allowed the book to be read in many different ways, as kind of as a metaphor, as an allegory for different things, and that's been really interesting for me to kind of hear those interpretations of the book too. And I think they're very very valid interpretations. And so so the decision was made pretty early on. I'm not going to give this answer, and some people will love it and some people will hate it.
Yeah, and not to make about, like you said, that's not the focus of the book, that
Yeah.
where the boxes are. That it's not a mystery that you're trying to write here.
Yes, exactly.
So yeah,
Be a
no,
different genre. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. um, the book of life is the story we all experience, and its conclusion is inevitable. However, the uncertainty regarding the timing and circumstances of its ending is what makes it so intriguing. How do you believe understanding this fact alters your outlook on life? Like, we all know how our lives are going to end. Eh, eh, Nobody can change that.
Yes. Yeah. I think most of us probably don't like to dwell on the thought, but yes, we all have this in common. We all share just the kind of truth of our mortality. And I think the more that I thought about it as I was writing this book, the less it became something kind of scary, and the more it was, to me, something that kind of is like a uniting factor. The fact that there are so many differences between us as humans. This is partially a book about kind of the way that we divide ourselves and the way that we really kind of play up those differences between us. But in the end, what we share far outweighs the things that divide us, and the things that we share are, as you said, like this sort of the essential human experience, the joys, the sufferings, and the fact that we all will face the same ending to that experience. We all have this, we all are mortal. And I think when I started thinking about it that way, it became more comforting to me, as just this kind of bonding factor among all of us humans. And the fact that what makes life valuable, what makes our time precious and valuable, is the fact that it is finite. And if it were, I think I'm not the first person to say this, if it were infinite, then we wouldn't feel as much of a need to kind of to think about our legacy, to be good to other people, to say the things that are on our minds. The fact that we have a short amount of time is what kind of makes that time inherently meaningful.
So many of our behaviors, even though, like you said, death is such a topic, it's a taboo topic. Nobody likes to discuss for very obvious reasons. And I've already thought, lost my thought.
No, it's true. I think what's been interesting in the reaction to this book is I've had readers reach out to me who have read the book during a time when, they were mourning the loss of somebody they know, or a time when someone they know is dealing with a very difficult diagnosis, something that kind of, puts the fact of our mortality right in front of you in a way that is not normally there in our day-to-day lives.
Yeah.
And these readers have reached out to me, said they found the book kind of, comforting to read during those times. And that has just been so special for me and so meaningful and powerful, to make, because I think people who are going through something like that, who are, in the grieving process, I've been there myself at times. It's so lonely and it's so isolating to feel like, I'm the only one who's upset about this right now. And just kind of to remind people that, we all go through this and you're not alone in those times. That wasn't part of the intention of this book, but the fact that it is kind of having that impact is really, feels like a real kind of honor, I think, for me.
And I think everybody's going to take out different from this book, depending where they are currently in their life, what they're going through. And and they will find something to, to relate to. And that was the beauty of the book. And you cover a lot of different aspects of it. And one thing that you had one character which doesn't even have a name, who would appear, I think, a handful of times with the song.
Yes,
Which suggests that we cannot predict the future and that whatever will be, will be. But can we realistically live by this philosophy? It's very hard. I think, does ignorance provide us the sense of control and optimism towards life?
Yeah, it's certainly something that was on my mind a lot while writing. I think, as you said, it's like, it'd be great if we could live by this, things are not in my control. And so I should just kind of live my best life, live as if I don't know how much time I have. But it's very, very hard to do that, because you can easily get swept up in just the day-to-day, stresses and challenges, of course. And personally, for me, like, I'm someone who has always struggled a lot with kind of with uncertainty, struggled a lot with anxiety, feeling like I need to be in control all the time. And when I don't have that sense of control, it's very challenging for me. And so a lot of writing this book was me kind of like confronting those personal challenges that I have, and my personal fear of uncertainty and fear of kind of not being in control. But also, I think the fact that, it was written largely during a time where, for all of us, so much was out of our control. We were, just witnessing kind of so much tragedy. And for me, I felt like I couldn't do anything to kind of help, other than stay inside my house and, having to kind of accept that this is part of life. The fact that things will happen that we don't have any control over. And, this is what we have to do in order to kind of keep moving on. We have to somehow make kind of peace with that. And it's super hard, but part of me writing the book was trying to kind of like make peace with that myself during a time when it was kind of at an all-time high.
Yeah, and I think it requires a lot of effort. We do know a lot of stuff that are right for us, but it does not take long for that knee-jerk reaction. And then you just have to stop yourself and then, get back to it. But it is having knowledge versus applying knowledge is two different things.
Yes.
So one of the very, very simple paragraph from your book, which I felt like it's so relatable, which I would like to read, is I spent most of my 20s worrying about how my boss would react to my design, or whether I was making as much money as I should be, or if I finally had the life that would make my old classmates see me as someone bigger and stronger than a nerdy boy that they had known. And of course, those things, building a career, making money, are still important, but they are not the only things that matter. The strings have made that clearer than ever. So although we often hear that we should focus on living life the fullest and not worry about the minor issues, many of us find it very difficult, as we discussed. Um, what is your when you wrote this is like we all every day, we, as I said, knee-jerk reaction, we know that we should not sweat the small stuff, but if somebody tells you something wrong and it it hurts you right there. What is your perspective on this matter?
My perspective is that I know how I would like to be, and I'm most of the time not that way. And so I'm constantly striving and, a work in progress to be that way. And I think, I mean, again, like kind of going back to the time that this book was written, I had kind of unexpectedly lost my job, and then we entered this massive health crisis. And so I had a lot of just kind of perspective thrown at me. Like, I thought that my job, this sort of day to day place that I was going to, which we all do, um, that was what was kind of taking out my whole focus, like the little stresses of, just day to day work. And then all of a sudden that was gone. And I was worried constantly about the health and safety of my loved ones. And it was just really this kind of, forced to be like, rethink the way that you've been kind of spending your days and what you've been spending your mental energy on and your worries about. And it ended up being, a really kind of special time for me where I got to kind of because I couldn't live in my apartment anymore without a salary. I like moved back with my family and got to kind of have that time with my family that I never thought I would have again. And, you know, I was so caught up in kind of, oh, this is going to hugely derail my career. This is a failure, losing my job, all this stuff. And I really tried to kind of reshape my perspective on, 2 years later, that ended up being a huge blessing in disguise for me because it gave me the time and the freedom to write this book and kind of launch a whole new career, which actually had always been my dream all along. And so, that when you're in the midst of it, of kind of, and you don't know what your perspective is going to be kind of, a year, 2 years down the line. And it truly, I was so focused on the one door closing that I couldn't see the other door opening at the time, and so I think that's been a big thing for me of trying to take that lesson going forward. And that when I'm in the middle of complaining about something or wallowing in self-pity about something, taking a step back and thinking, well, I don't know what my perspective on this event is going to be, a year from now. And maybe it will be, and maybe it will still be self-pity, but maybe it won't be. Maybe it'll turn out to be, something I never could have seen coming.
And I think we all of us, if not in the midst of it, later on, we all found a silver line, and that helped us move forward and made it. Even though I feel like 2020 was yesterday, it's clearly it's been 4 years, but it does feel like it just happened.
Yeah.
So time passes, whether it's good or it's bad.
True.
But the one funny thing that made me think, I'm not a huge fan of insurance companies, health insurance companies. The way they rule our lives, that's what the part I do. We all need
Yes,
it, but
yes.
the way
The amount of time you spend on the phone with talking about your
exactly.
bills and things. Yes. Yeah.
Yes, and they make decision what we should do or not, not the medical professional. So, and already we, without even what the premise of your book is, we don't even know when we are gonna, our life is gonna end. Still, if you have a pre-existing condition, you do get discriminated by
Yes.
insurance company. So, can you even imagine if we all come with our expiration date? I think it will bring out, as we were discussing in the library, that I think knowing uh, it'll a lot of negative emotions will also come out. We will have a lot of negative experiences if we all knew about each other. Like insurance company would not invest in us. Yeah, we might not invest in somebody's friendship, or somebody might not invest in the relationship if they knew how long it's gonna last. And that was my like I think it would have such a negative impact on our life just knowing. Um, but I was like, the health insurance company came in my mind. I was like, what would
Sure.
they do to us if they
Yeah.
knew that this is gonna, uh,
Yeah.
you
I
know?
think, yeah, I wanted to explore how, yes, could this be both like a blessing and a curse? Kind of, would it have both negative and positive impact? And um, I think there's a way in which it could, maybe the most likely impact kind of on a larger society level feels negative in the sense that it could lead to more kind of discrimination and people, not, as you said, not kind of investing in relationships with people with shorter strings. But then maybe even if it had a negative kind of, community impact, maybe it could still have a positive, individual impact. And that if you as an individual person find knowing the amount of time that you have to
Yeah.
be a gift and something that you use for good and that you use to kind of live your life somehow better, more intentionally, then maybe, maybe the positive and the negatives do kind of ultimately get balanced out. But um, you sort of like hit it right on the nose that deciding how sort of negative, how dark, how dystopian to go was a big question for me with writing this book. And my initial thought actually was, okay, I'm writing this book where these strings arrive. Um, maybe it would make us a more compassionate society, a more empathetic society, if we had this ability to, have a greater awareness of what people are going through. um, Maybe we would be kinder to each other if people were all aware, oh, this person has, I don't know what the length is, but they've got a string somewhere in their house because I've got a string in my house. Like maybe that would just make feel better to each other.
Mhm.
But then I kind of realized that I think that was naive. I think that was too idealistic of me to think that would happen. And unfortunately, we would probably do what we always do, which is, find a way to kind of highlight our more kind of selfish tendencies, our prejudicial tendencies, our tribalistic kind of way of being. And so I felt like that was really the direction the story had to go in first, but that I wanted to end on, the idea that maybe that maybe there's hope. Maybe we'll do things differently. Maybe we don't have to always repeat the same mistakes of history that we've repeated many, many times. There's always hope that kind of the next generation might do things differently. And so I wanted to end on that note for myself, to have the book feel both realistic in the way that it did portray kind of the way that we sometimes behave very poorly as a society, but not so pessimistic that I don't believe that kind of humans are inherently good, and we do have, I do have a hopeful outlook for all of us.
And I think what, again, the way you ended your book was, you said several years after. So that means now people are used to, this is a norm,
Yeah.
like
Yes.
the generation that were born or were young, and this is putting a mask on, it's such a norm for
Right.
them. You accept, you move on.
Yeah.
But in view, if you look at our initial reaction, like you mentioned your story, initially we all were absolutely upset, even though it was, we were looking somebody to blame.
Right.
So, and like you said, like initially in your book, there were negative emotions were coming out politically. People are blaming short stringers, and people are out there doing riots, this and that. But down the road, okay, I think everybody negativity drains you out.
Yes.
And
Yes.
eventually, I feel like that's when your book kind of, so you showed both the sides. And I think that's how I see life too, because you cannot be, I'm sure anomaly exists, and there are people who are 100 times all the time negative, and that requires a lot more strength, in my perspective, to be negative.
Exhausting. Yeah.
Like, absolutely exhausting. But like during in the beginning, in the COVID, yes, absolutely, we all were upset. Everything was shutting down. We were not able to travel. We were not able to order takeout. We had to cook at home. We had to clean our home. So, but then, the phenomenon. Everybody was baking, and then Zoom blew up. Everybody was just trying to connect with each other. So after some time, we all figured it out, how to
Yeah.
deal with the situation, and found the positive out of it. And that's
Yeah.
how I feel like that's how your book was. You did highlight a little bit of negative, absolutely, because we all have all shades. We humans are made up of all the shades, and you kind of portrayed a lot of them and very, very, very nicely. And it was a delight to read your book.
Thank
But
you.
I cannot resist asking you if a mysterious box landed on your doorstep, what's the first thing you would do?
Um, yeah, if I knew that I was like, if a mysterious box landed on my doorstep and I didn't know what was inside, I probably wouldn't open it at all just because I'm like a cautious person and I would be like, I don't know what that is. Um, but if I did know that the strings were inside, I think right now I still wouldn't open it. I think I don't want to know right now. But I think maybe down the line I might want to look and right now I want to just kind of keep I'm very lucky. I'm very fortunate. I'm living my dream. I'm doing what I've always wanted to do. And so I wouldn't have to make any kind of massive changes to my life, I think, depending on what I saw inside the box.
Yeah.
But I think perhaps further down in my life as I'm, planning, as I hopefully have a family, things like that, maybe then the knowledge would become a little more important to have.
Helpful. Okay. Okay. Good to know. And before I open it up to our patrons, I was just wondering, do you have any books that you read recently that you want to share with us?
Oh, the problem is that I'm always reading on a bit of a delay because I'm spending a lot of time writing and reading books for kind of, for my research for writing. I'm like 6 months behind always on the books that are actually coming out.
Yeah.
So I think so I was like my recent favorite right now kind of came out a little while ago last year. But it was Tom Lake by Anne Patchett.
Yeah.
She's just one of my favorite authors. I so admire her career and her kind of the variation in all of her different stories, how they're all so different but so beautiful. So I loved that one recently, but it's not super new because my pile of books to read is quite large. And I'm always falling behind, as I'm sure people on this call can relate to.
Yeah, you're managing reading and writing both. So, but you mentioned you're always reading for your research. Do you have any other books, any other project in pipeline that you can share with us?
I'm working on another book right now. It's not a sequel. It's not really related. But I think it has a lot of similarities. So I hope that it will kind of resonate with people who enjoyed The Measure. But it's still pretty early. I'm still in the weeds with it. But it's been funny to write because I'll be in and I'll be writing, and then all of a sudden a thought will strike me like, oh, but they haven't mentioned yet like how long their string is. And I'm like, this is a different book. Oh my gosh, like my head is just still so stuck in like string world. That I'm like, how could we have gone a whole chapter without mentioning the strings? Like, what's going on? It's been a little hard to like separate them in my head, which was unexpected actually.
Did you get attached to any particular character, or did you have a favorite?
All of them. Yeah, I miss all of them. Well, some more than others, but even if I didn't kind of agree with all the characters, I still found them all very kind of fascinating to write and fascinating to sort of get inside their mindset. And obviously, as anyone who's read the book knows, I ended the lives of almost all of them by the time I had gotten to the end of the book. And so it was very difficult to do that each time I had to write those scenes and then reread the scenes as I was editing. I found myself getting sad. So I think it's because these people lived inside my head for 4 years really while I was writing. It's a long time. And so having to say goodbye to all of them on the page and then now kind of in my life has been surprisingly hard. Yeah.
Do you see your book turning into like a mini series or something anybody has approached?
I would love that. It would be a dream come true.
Right?
Yeah, it's I've been approached. The sort of the rights for the book have been optioned by a production company, and so as of now, I just have to wait and keep my fingers crossed and hope that something does come to fruition. That would be incredible.
That would be, and we can't wait.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, good luck with that.
Thank
So,
you.
yeah, and congratulations on this fantastic book. It was, as I said, it was definitely a delight to read.
Thank you.
And I would like to now open it up to our patrons. So let's see. Um, View gallery. Okay, we have a question in chat, so I'm going to read that for you. Um, oh, this is your debut novel. How did the change, oops, how did this change your life in a good and the bad way?
Oh my gosh, it changed, I mean, just completely changed my life and changed it in many, many ways. I'll say almost exclusively good. Sure, there's a little bit of bad maybe. Um, in the good, it's just like I grew up kind of constantly reading, just loved books since from a very young age. And so it was always a dream in the back of my head, like, could I maybe one day write a book? But it never felt like kind of a practical career plan necessarily. So I initially kind of pursued like journalism and then travel writing and things that felt like a more, you know, I saw a more clear path to kind of getting a career that way. And novel writing was just like the dream in the back of my head that I was, doing on the weekends. Um, and so it's just been like absolutely incredible to actually be able to do this full time, to be able to kind of talk to readers all over the country and now all over the world. I'll get messages on Instagram and I'll put them through Google Translate so I can, communicate with people who are trying to talk to me about the book. Um, it's been so wild, just to go from being an avid reader to now being on the other side of it and be kind of, talking to people who share my love of stories. Um, and I think truly the only bad is that, I have a pretty thin skin. And so there was a brief time when the book was first coming out that I was reading the reviews, that I was like reading Goodreads and reading and so even if there were, 10 really lovely, meaningful, thoughtful reviews, and then one like, you know, hated this book. Like that one that would like keep me up at night. It would stick in my head, and so I had to learn to stop reading those websites, as my agent and my editor have all told me. They're like, those websites are for readers and they're not for the authors. You really shouldn't be on them. And just kind of, accepting like, I don't love every book I read, even though I respect every book I've read because I know what it takes to write a book. But yeah, this story is not going to be for everybody. And so I have to, if I occasionally come across a person saying that this book wasn't for me, I have to find a way to have that not kind of pierce me right into my soul and keep me up at night.
Do you miss your travel?
Yeah, the
What you were travel
travel
writer
writing
for part of your life?
job. Yeah, I do. It was a really, an incredible opportunity, incredible job to be able to travel to other countries for work. I mean, that's just such a rare kind of privilege. And I got to see, places I probably would not have been able to see. And so that, just every time that I'm kind of traveling, even domestic travel, anytime I'm in a different state, it just
Mhm.
kind of reminds me of how big the world is and how many people there are out there and how kind of small I am, but in a good way. Like it's just, comforting to kind of be like, no, there's my little petty problems that I'm thinking about right now are so small compared to kind of the whole world and all these different people out there. Um, and so I do miss that, but obviously a little bit of my love of travel was kind of put into this book with specifically my trip to Italy was kind
Oh
of
yeah.
inspired the scenes in this book,
Yes.
um, you know, that are set in Italy, and kind of my ode to how much I loved my time in my sort of short visits to that country. But yeah, I would love to get back to traveling. I haven't traveled in quite a while, so I'm itching to go somewhere.
So, all right, I'm trying to see if anybody has a
I was like,
question.
I can see them here if you want. I was like, someone asked if I had a favorite character and if I fashioned
Oh,
any from my own life. Um, I don't think I had a favorite. I think I can't pick. although I did notice in myself that the sort of the death scene that was hardest to write for me was Javier's scene. It was just it hit me the hardest while writing, even though they all hit hard. And so I don't know what that means, but I was most emotional about that. I think also because part of his storyline, the storyline of the prayer card that he's kind of holding in those final moments, the one that was passed on to him, that is a true story that was taken from my family history, from specifically my grandfather's service in World War II. He was given this prayer card by one of his kind of fellow soldiers, and that prayer card has stayed in our family. It's like, gosh, I mean, almost 100 years old, I think now. And so I put that in the story as kind of a tribute to him, to my family, to this moment of, you know, such pure kind of selflessness and compassion between two people, of one sort of, you know, it was an older soldier who was passing this on to my grandfather, who was very young, and saying, you know, hold on to this and it'll keep you safe. And so I wanted that moment of kind of just, you know, human connection to be in this book, because this was a book that talked about kind of the ways that we aren't always nice to people, and always good to each other as humans. And here's a moment of people just being good to each other. And so, you know, so that was taken from my own life. And I think that's partially why that moment was very, you know, emotional for me to write. But other than that, I think the character of Nina has a little bit of my kind of background professionally in sort of journalism, and kind of editing, and has some of my sort of, you know, type A like idiosyncrasies. She has that. And I think I'm most aligned in terms of the perspective on whether or not they open the box. I'm most aligned with kind of Amy's sort of line of thinking around it. But really the rest of it is kind of my imagination. And all that, I mean, all the New York settings, the subway scenes, all that was, you know, I was living in New York City at the time that I wrote this. And so, you know, some of the stuff from the subway was like, you know, stuff that I actually experienced on the subway. So the setting is the most kind of drawn from my real life.
Thank you. Anybody else have a question? If you want to unmute and ask, or type.
There's another one in the chat.
I know there's very nice comment.
I bought your book again.
The Strand's last comment. I had signed it at the Strand. That's so interesting. I don't know. I wonder when that would have been. But that's amazing. I was like, during the first couple weeks after the book came out, I was like constantly going into bookstores and seeing if they had it and that I could sign it. But I wouldn't, like, when I would go up to the front, I wouldn't tell them that I was the author. I was just like, oh, do you happen to have this book, you know, The Measure by Nikki Erlick? Because if they didn't have it, I didn't want them to feel badly that they were telling me that they weren't carrying the book. Yeah. And so I was just like pretending I was a reader looking for it. And then if they did have it, I was like, oh, that's me. Can I sign it? And everyone, like, booksellers were always so, you know, so nice and welcoming when I came in and wanted to sign copies. It was always really, you know, it remains a very fun kind of part of the job. And yeah, hearing or like seeing photos of people being like, well, I randomly got a signed copy. One of my old high school classmates like was in a Barnes and Noble and randomly got a signed copy that I had signed, wow. Which is and sent that to me, which is so funny. Like, you know, someone I hadn't seen in 10 years. It's like, you signed this.
That is special.
Yeah, it's very special. It's very special.
What
question?
Okay, go ahead, Don, and then we'll get to the chat question. Yeah, go ahead.
The guy on the bicycle showed up all through the book, and I thought you did a really great job with it, where you placed him and how people responded to him. And he was so alive to me because my daughter lives in Brooklyn, and there's some guy who rides around their neighborhood, not with a boombox, but he sings at the top of his lungs.
Really?
While he's running down the street. And I wondered, was there someone that you knew of that was doing that?
He was based on a real person who I think I only saw twice in New York City, but I saw twice, and they were like separated 6 months at a time. And it was someone who was riding a bike and playing a very loud song on their radio. And then I just saw him again 6 months, and it was the same song. And I was just like, I think this is the same guy. It was not Que Sera, Sera. I obviously changed that for the sort of theme of the book. But I just thought that was so funny, because I was like, is this? I was like, is this what he does just all the time? Like, or did I just happen to catch him on two rides where he was doing this and playing some music? And I don't know, but I liked to imagine that he's doing it all the time and just all over the city. And so that's kind of what, what went into the book. But yeah, I'm not surprised that there's a similar phenomenon happening in Brooklyn.
Yeah, it really added to it. And I also wondered, you mentioned about the prayer card, but did you come across a letter with Gertrude, or is that part of the story? Because I also felt that was a very effective story that you wove through into multiple characters' lives.
Thank you. The letter is like half fictionalized, half inspired by my own visit to the World War II Museum in New Orleans. And they did, I don't know if it's a permanent exhibit or just it was an exhibit while I was there, but they had letters on display from soldiers back home. And so that letter is kind of like an amalgamation of some stuff that I saw there, but names are changed, context was sort of changed in order to fit the book, of course. But yeah, that was inspired definitely by those real letters there. And I just always kind of had a personal like affinity for letter writing, and just kind of the feeling like I'm just always kind of at my most sort of raw and honest with like the written word and the physical written word. And so I wanted to kind of have, and I've always loved like romances with pen pal romances specifically. I've never had one myself. I've always wanted to. And so I wanted to put that in the book as well.
Yeah, I liked how you did that. Can I ask, as a young person, do you write cursive?
I learned it in school. And so I technically, I believe I know how, but I really don't. Or write, sometimes I write in like a hybrid. It's like very kind of, it's like a fluid, flowy way of writing, but it's certainly not the actual technically accurate cursive, because some of the cursive letters are a little too hard. But I like something in the middle. Yeah.
Anymore. But if you like letter writing, it's so much easier.
It's true. It would be I know. And I have, I've received, of course, when you're a writer, you receive a lot of kind of notebooks and a lot of pens as gifts, which I love, but I've received some very, very nice pens in my life. And so I'm almost like too afraid to write letters with them though, because like they're too nice. But they're so gorgeous to write with, of course.
Thanks.
Thank you, Donna. Nikki, we have one question in the chat also. It's about what celebrities would you want to potential?
Too hard. Yeah, anybody truly. I mean, yeah, I've seen a couple of people on Instagram post like, this is my dream cast. And that's so like, that's what a fun, post to see someone's idea of who they would cast. Yeah, I have, there was nobody that I had in mind while I was writing either, because, this is my first book. I was writing it before I had an agent. I didn't know anybody who'd ever published a book. So I was writing it really just kind of as a leap of faith and not knowing if, it would even get published or read beyond my immediate family members. So it never would have occurred to me to be thinking while I was writing like, oh, this is a great Meryl Streep character, like, yeah, I still don't I'm trying to be, cautiously optimistic and not let myself get carried away. So I haven't even really allowed myself to kind of daydream a cast at this point.
That's fair though. Do we have any other question from the crowd if you want to unmute? Oh, Mrs. Thayer. Go ahead, Mrs. Thayer.
I have one. I love the cover of your book. Did you design it, or was that designed for you? I like the way the string is wrapped around the bouquet of leaves.
Yeah. I wish I had designed it, because I agree, it's beautiful, and the way the strings are incorporated, I think, is really, subtle but smart. No, it was designed by the art department at HarperCollins, who published the book, and they, I think this was like the first design they showed me, and they said, what are your thoughts on it? And it was a different color scheme when they showed it to me. It wasn't the gold and the blue. And so the only kind of note that I had was, can I see it in some different colors? And then they came back with this, you know, this combination. And I just thought this was really powerful.
Beautiful.
Yeah, like the gold just kind of feels like, you know, it's, I don't know, it's like a sunrise or something where it gives me kind of like a hopeful feeling. And then, yeah, I just loved kind of the, you know, we had a very early discussion, like how literal should the cover be? Should there be like a box on the cover, a box and a string, a box on a doorstep, you know, all those things. And I was like, I think I want it to be more, you know, more abstract and more symbolic and more just kind of like the emotions of the book. And I felt like this captured that really nicely. But a lot of the foreign translations have been doing different covers, and some a good amount of them actually do have like boxes on the covers, and they've been doing interesting different things. And so that's been fun to see. Because I've had some people say, I wish there was a box on the cover. And I send them a link and I'm like, you can buy the book in German if you want to buy a box on the cover. But no, I'm glad you liked the cover, because I really liked it as well.
Thank you. And one comment to you, Pinki. I'm glad we didn't come with an expiration date.
Right? It won't be, life won't be fun, at least for me.
Be that expired milk on the shelf or something.
Will be discarded pretty soon. You just have one comment, Nikki, that Kathy, she loved your book, and congratulations. I'm in 2 book clubs and we are both reading it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really owe so much of like the life of this book to book clubs specifically. You know, I didn't write it thinking like, oh, this is a book club book, it's gonna, you know, spark so much discussion. I thought of it more, you know, you as an individual reader, it'll prompt a lot of kind of self-reflection. And I didn't even think about the next step, which is that then you talk about it with other people, and you talk about what would you do, and you know, if you were in a family, what would you all do if these arrived, and things like that. And so it's just been really meaningful to kind of see the discussions it's prompted, and the fact that it is being read in book clubs. It's really very special. Yeah, thank you.
One of the questions, I don't know how I forgot to ask you, but what would hurt you more, knowing the length of the string, about your length of the string or your loved ones?
Yeah, I'm a very unfair person in the sense that I don't want to know the length of my own string, but I want to know the length of my loved one's strings, which I know is not fair. I can't ask them that, but like I would want to know that information if they wanted to know it themselves and they wanted to share. But yeah, it's funny how people get so viscerally angry about the scene where, you know, Claire, Ben's ex-girlfriend, kind of opens his box for him, and people are so upset by that. It's so and like I get it, of course. Oh my gosh, it's such a betrayal, but just the way people are so upset on Ben's behalf has been, you know, really kind of special for me to see. And I'm like, I think, you know, people are so shocked by it. They do see it as such a betrayal, but I don't think it's unrealistic. I think there's people out there who would probably do that.
But where I was going with that is, okay, everybody's boxes are open and all the strings are out there. And if you and your loved ones have short strings, what would hurt you more? Your short string or your loved one's short string?
Probably my loved ones, especially if mine was longer than theirs. And so I was aware of the fact that I was going to I was going to lose them and they were not going to lose me. That would be very upsetting. Even if I then had this knowledge and I was able to somehow prepare, you know, there's only so you're never really prepared, you know, like it's even knowing it's not the same. And so I think that would be worse for me to anticipate that I was going to have to say goodbye to them.
And we clearly are never prepared, because as we discussed, we all know how this story of our life is going to end, but it still hurts every time we lose our loved ones. It's never,
Yeah.
You know, you can be ever prepared for it. But that absolutely, this book made us think in all the aspects.
I was like, we can't end on such a sad note. Somebody has to ask a more uplifting question before I can leave.
Anybody has any uplifting question?
I know. Somebody has to ask me. Happy.
Boy, otherwise
Thank
I
you.
have to come up with one.
No, it's okay.
No, this was no, as I was going towards the uplifting one. Sabina, do you have any questions?
So I don't. I'm sorry. It was unfair of me to put pressure on people.
No, don't worry about it. But no, really.
I was just gonna say, as a, when you got on your last question, as a parent, I would never want to know about my children's
Sure.
friends. It would be the most upsetting. I think that would be more upsetting
Sure.
than my spouse. Like I can see from every point of view, but my children, that would be
Yeah.
impossible to know. I could.
Yeah.
I would. That'd be awful. Ugh.
Yeah. That was not more uplifting, so that doesn't help.
Oh, I know. But I love the book.
But you're
you know.
absolutely correct that you're absolutely correct. But yes, somebody commented that it made them be nicer to people, and I think that's a beautiful note to end on. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's really
Definitely.
that's really special.
That's what we need to take from the book, that
And be nicer to yourself too.
Yes,
Be nicer to everyone,
exactly.
and be nicer to yourself, because it's hard. Everything is, it's hard, and so be kind to yourself as well.
Right.
There's
Good
one more
note to
comment
end on.
in the chat.
Yeah, I hope, Nikki, you because they're all compliments, so it's everything.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and the authenticity comes through,
Thank you.
and the book, looking for where this book.
Because I told people how intensely I take the critiques, and so now they're overcompensating by being nice to me. So.
No, they are all here
Very
because
true.
they loved your book.
Right.
They're all here, so we all are here because we loved your book.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming, for taking
Thank
the
you.
time to be here.
Thank you for taking the
taking
time.
the time. Absolutely, and good luck with your future projects. And we will be manifesting to turn this book into some kind of visual, whether it's a movie or a mini series.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Nikki.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Have a good
Good
night.
night.